Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive into the laws of human nature by Robert Greene.
It's going to be a fascinating journey, exploring the often hidden forces that shape how we behave. Pulling wisdom from history.
Psychology.
Yeah, psychology and Greene's, super sharp observations.
Definitely. And for those of you wanting to dive even deeper yourselves, you can find a link to the full book in the description or pinned comment.
Absolutely.
Now think of this deep dive as a journey to understanding yourself and the people around you a little bit better.
Yeah, like how to spot those irrational impulses that I think we all have sometimes.
For sure. How to avoid being manipulated by, those who are maybe a little bit more cunning.
Right.
And even how to maybe ethically influence others in positive ways.
Yeah, and how to spot those dangerous types like the narcissists and the aggressors before they cause us harm.
Exactly. So you ready to unlock some of the secrets of human nature?
Let's do it.
Let's go. All right. So Greene kicks things off with this really fascinating concept of the power of irrationality.
Yeah, and it's funny how often we think we're being totally logical, but then there are these underlying currents of emotion kind of pulling the strings.
Right.
And Greene starts with this great story about Pericles, this brilliant Athenian statesman.
Oh, yeah. Pericles.
Yeah,
He was known for being so calm and strategic.
exactly. But
Yeah.
even he got caught up in the emotional whirlwind of the Athenian assembly.
So what happened? Set the scene for us.
Okay, so picture this. Athens is in a really tough spot facing this ultimatum from Sparta,
Oh,
right? And the assembly is in total chaos.
I can imagine.
Everyone's shouting, some are pushing for war, others are begging for peace, but very few are actually stopping to think about what are the long-term consequences of either choice.
Right. It's all very emotionally driven.
Exactly. And that's where Pericles steps in and he's like, hold on, everyone. Let's not rush into anything rash. We can't win a land battle against the Spartans. Our best bet is a defensive strategy.
Makes sense.
It does. But here's the thing. Despite Pericles' wisdom, his plan gets totally derailed.
What happened?
Well, a devastating plague hits Athens.
Oh, no.
People are terrified, they're grieving, and they just completely abandon his rational approach.
Wow. So even the wisest among us can get kind of swept up in that collective emotional wave.
That's the point. And this isn't just ancient history either. This pattern plays out all the time, sometimes with really disastrous consequences.
Like what?
Well, think about the 2008 financial crash.
Oh, man.
You had all these brilliant financial minds, people who really should have known better, getting caught up in this speculative bubble.
They were all telling themselves, this time it's different.
Right, but it rarely is. The emotional pull of potential riches was just too strong.
Yeah, that fear of missing out is real.
It is. So Greene's point is that we all have this emotional self inside of us, and it often sabotages our best intentions.
Okay, so how do we fight back against that? Do we just have to resign ourselves to being ruled by our emotions?
Not necessarily. Awareness is the first step. We need to learn to recognize when our emotions are kind of hijacking our thinking. And then we can start to develop strategies for making more objective decisions.
So step one, self-awareness. Got it.
E-
Now, I'm curious about this concept of deep narcissism that Greene talks about.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
So it's basically narcissism on steroids. And Greene uses this really chilling example of Joseph Stalin to illustrate this.
Stalin.
Yeah, on the surface, he could be quite charming.
Really?
Yeah, but underneath that was this ravenous hunger for power and control that led to the deaths of millions.
It's terrifying to think how someone can project this image of being a kind and understanding leader while secretly orchestrating these horrific acts.
It is, and deep narcissists are masters at exploiting people's empathy. They have this uncanny ability to read you, to figure out your weaknesses, and then they use that knowledge to their advantage.
It's like they're emotional predators.
In a way, yes. And to really drive this point home, Greene brings in the story of Jeanne des Anges, this French nun who convinced everyone that she was possessed by demons.
With a possessed nun, how does that fit in with narcissism?
Well, think about it. Jeanne craved attention.
Okay.
And she went to extreme lengths to get it. She was this master manipulator using her supposed possession to gain sympathy and control over those around her.
Wow. It makes you wonder how many people throughout history have used similar tactics, using charm and charisma to mask their true, darker intentions.
It's a great question, and it makes you think, how can we protect ourselves from these types of manipulators? Luckily, Greene offers some insights into recognizing and decoding their behavior.
Yeah, for sure. Something to watch out for.
Definitely.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about seduction and desire.
Okay.
Greene has this whole section about the law of covetousness,
Mm.
and he uses Coco Chanel as an example, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those just joining us, a link to the full book can be found in the description or pinned comment.
Absolutely.
So Coco Chanel, what was it about her that really exemplifies this law?
Well, Chanel was a genius when it came to understanding desire. She knew that scarcity creates value, so instead of trying to make her designs accessible to everyone, she made them exclusive, almost unattainable.
Right, so it's like that saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So by making her designs harder to get, she actually made people want them even more.
Precisely. And she was a master of strategic withdrawal as well. By not constantly being in the spotlight, she created this aura of mystery and anticipation.
I never thought about it that way, but it makes total sense. It's like she was playing hard to get on a grand scale.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that this principle applies to so much more than just fashion. Think about your own life. Have you ever noticed how something becomes more desirable when it's harder to obtain?
Oh, for sure.
Whether it's a material object or someone's attention, this principle is always at play.
That's a great point. I'm definitely going to be more aware of that now. But let's move on to something a little bit darker. The shadow side of human nature.
Ooh.
Greene argues that we all have this hidden part of ourselves that contains these repressed desires and emotions. And he uses Richard Nixon as a prime example.
Right. Nixon is such a fascinating case study because he spent years carefully crafting this public image of strength and resilience. But underneath it all, he was deeply insecure, paranoid, and prone to aggression.
And those darker impulses eventually led to his downfall with the Watergate scandal, right?
Exactly. It's like his carefully constructed persona completely shattered.
It's interesting how that shadow self can emerge sometimes in really unexpected and destructive ways.
They can. And what's so important here is that this concept of the shadow applies to all of us. We all have parts of ourselves that we repress or deny, often because they're not socially acceptable.
So we try to bury those parts of ourselves deep down, hoping no one will ever see them.
Right, but according to Greene, that's a recipe for disaster. If we try to keep our shadow hidden, it will inevitably emerge in unhealthy ways.
Like what?
Think like outbursts of anger, passive-aggressive behavior, even self-sabotage.
So what are we supposed to do? Embrace our dark side?
Not exactly. It's more about acknowledging and integrating those shadow aspects of ourselves. We need to be honest with ourselves about our tendencies so that we can manage them constructively.
Right.
That's where real personal growth and authenticity come from.
All right, so we need to become aware of our shadow and learn to manage it. Got it. Now, I'm curious about this idea of social forces that Greene talks about.
Yeah.
How do they shape our behavior even when we think we're acting independently?
Right. Well, he uses a really powerful story to illustrate the story of Jianhua and the Cultural Revolution in China. This young student gets completely swept up in the revolutionary fervor, participating in acts of violence and destruction that he never would have imagined himself capable of.
It's scary to think how easily we can be influenced by the people around us, especially in a charged environment like that.
It is, and that's exactly Greene's point. The need to fit in the pressure of the group, it can override our individual rationality and morality. He calls this group intelligence, and it's something we need to be very aware of.
So how do we resist that kind of pressure? How do we make sure we're not just blindly following the crowd?
It takes conscious effort.
Yeah.
We need to develop our critical thinking skills, learn to question assumptions, and be willing to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's unpopular.
That's easier said than done, especially when you're surrounded by people who all seem to be on the same page.
Absolutely. But it's essential if we want to avoid getting swept up in collective madness.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of irrationality, the dangers of deep narcissism, the art of seduction, the shadow self, and the influence of social forces. It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But before we move on, I want to remind everyone that a link to the full book can be found in the description or pinned comment.
Definitely.
Now let's shift gears and talk about authority,
Okay.
where Greene contrasts the entitlement mentality with genuine leadership. And he uses Queen Elizabeth I as a prime example.
She's a great example.
Yeah, she inherited the throne in the midst of chaos.
Mm.
England's facing financial instability, religious conflict.
Sounds like a nightmare scenario.
Total nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
So how did she handle it?
Well, instead of falling into the trap of entitlement, she made a conscious choice to earn her authority.
Okay.
She worked tirelessly to stabilize the economy, unite her people, and project an image of strength and competence.
So she didn't just rely on her royal status.
Exactly. She understood that true authority comes from actions, not just from titles or positions. And what's fascinating is that she seemed to be motivated by a genuine desire to serve her country, not by personal gain or a need to dominate others.
That's a refreshing perspective on leadership.
It is.
It's not about wielding power over others, but about using your influence to make a positive impact.
And that's a stark contrast to leaders who are driven by ego and entitlement. They often create toxic cultures and ultimately undermine their own authority.
Okay, so we should be wary of leaders who exhibit those entitlement tendencies. But how do we spot them? What are the red flags?
Well, one thing to look for is a sense of grandiosity. They often have an inflated sense of their own importance and a lack of empathy for others.
So basically, they're more interested in serving their own ego than in serving the needs of the group.
Exactly. And they often surround themselves with yes men who reinforce their inflated sense of self.
It's like they create their own echo chamber where their worst impulses are amplified.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's a recipe for disaster.
Okay, so we've talked about the dangers of entitlement and the qualities of true leadership. But let's face it, there are always going to be people who try to take advantage of others. So let's talk about aggression. This is where Greene explores the different forms that aggression can take, from the blatant bully to the more subtle passive-aggressive manipulator.
Right. So you've got the obvious aggressors who are loud and in your face, but then they're the ones who kind of fly under the radar.
Exactly. And they can be just as damaging, if not more so. To illustrate this, Greene uses the example of John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon.
Ah, Rockefeller. The poster child for ruthless ambition.
Exactly. He was a master at using intimidation and manipulation to crush his competitors and build his empire. He knew that most people are conflict averse, and he exploited that to his advantage.
Right, so he played on people's fears to get what he wanted.
Precisely. And what's interesting is that this type of aggression is often masked by a veneer of respectability. So he was basically a wolf in sheep's clothing.
You could say that Rockefeller was known for his philanthropy and his religious piety, which helped him deflect criticism and maintain a positive public image. But beneath that carefully cultivated facade was a relentless drive for power and domination.
So how do we protect ourselves from these aggressive types? Is it even possible?
It is. The first step is recognizing the warning signs. One key insight Greene offers is that aggressors are often driven by deep insecurities. They need to dominate others to feel a sense of control and validation.
So their aggression is actually a sign of weakness.
In a way, yes. And understanding this can help us avoid taking their attacks personally.
That's helpful. But what about the more passive-aggressive types? They're harder to read, aren't they?
They can be. But Greene offers some strategies for recognizing their behavior and for setting boundaries to protect yourself from their emotional manipulation. One thing to watch out for is the use of guilt trips, backhanded compliments, and strategic procrastination.
It's like they're waging a covert war of attrition, slowly wearing you down with their negativity and subtle digs.
Exactly. And what makes it so challenging is that they'll often deny any malicious intent. They'll make you feel like you're the one being unreasonable, even when they're clearly the ones being manipulated.
It's like gaslighting, right?
Exactly.
They make you question your own sanity.
Precisely. But once you become aware of their tactics, you can start to see through their manipulations and take steps to protect yourself.
Okay, so we've talked about the dangers of aggression in all its forms. But now I want to shift gears and talk about one of the most profound topics.
Yeah.
Greene explores the importance of finding your purpose.
Yeah.
This is where Greene really dives into the difference between chasing external validation and cultivating a genuine sense of meaning in your life.
Right. So it's not about chasing money, fame, or power for its own sake.
Exactly. Those things can be alluring, but they rarely lead to lasting fulfillment. True purpose comes from aligning your actions with your values and passions. So how do we find that kind of purpose?
Well, Greene uses the example of Anton Chekhov, the Russian writer and physician. He didn't just find meaning in his writing, he also found it in his service to others. He worked tirelessly as a doctor, even while battling a debilitating illness, because he felt a deep sense of purpose in helping those in need.
It's like he was living proof that true fulfillment often comes from contributing to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And his story highlights another important point, that Greene makes the power of reframing our relationship with time. We often feel like time is slipping away from us, but Chekhov shows us that we have more control over our experience of time than we realize.
By focusing on what truly matters.
Precisely. It's not about denying the reality of our mortality, but about using our time wisely and making conscious choices about how we want to spend it.
That's a powerful message. And it leads us to Greene's final and perhaps most profound point, the wisdom of facing death.
Oh,
He uses the example of Flannery O'Connor, the American writer, who was diagnosed with lupus at a young age.
Yeah.
But before we delve deeper into that, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to explore the wisdom of facing death and how it can transform our lives.
You know, O'Connor's story is both heartbreaking but really inspiring at the same time.
Yeah.
She knew her time was limited, but she used that knowledge to just focus on what was really important to her. You know, she poured her heart and soul into her writing, creating this body of work that still impacts people today.
It's a powerful reminder that confronting our own mortality, however uncomfortable it may be,
Yeah. Yeah.
can actually help us live more fully in the present.
It's true. It's not about dwelling on the morbid or the macabre. It's about recognizing that our time here is finite and using that awareness to live more intentionally.
So how do we actually do that? How do we confront our own mortality without, completely freaking out?
Well, I think it starts with accepting the inevitability of death. It's something that we all have to face, and once we can kind of come to terms with that, we can start to shift our focus from fearing death to embracing life.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just kind of avoid thinking about death altogether because it's just too scary.
I understand that, but Greene argues that by acknowledging our mortality, we actually free ourselves to live more fully in the present.
So it's like a wake-up call.
Yeah.
A reminder that we're not guaranteed tomorrow.
Exactly. And when we live with that awareness, we become so much more appreciative of the simple things. The beauty of nature, the love of our family and friends, the joy of pursuing our passions.
It's like that saying, life is too short to...
Fill in the blank, right?
Exactly.
Life is too short to be stuck in a job you hate, to be in a relationship that's draining you, to be constantly chasing after things that won't ultimately bring you happiness.
So Greene is basically saying that by facing our fears about death, we can actually unlock a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, that's the paradox. By embracing the reality of our mortality, we free ourselves to truly live.
That's a powerful message, and I think it ties in beautifully with everything else we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
The power of irrationality, and the dangers of narcissism, the art of seduction, the shadow self, the influence of social forces, the nature of true authority, the different faces of aggression, and ultimately the importance of finding your purpose.
It's all connected. And by understanding these fundamental laws of human nature, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? What are some of the key takeaways from Greene's exploration of human nature?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is this call for radical self-awareness. We need to understand our own irrational tendencies, our shadow sides, our susceptibility to social pressures, and our deepest desires.
Because only then can we start making conscious choices about how we want to live.
Exactly. And that involves cultivating our rational selves, developing emotional intelligence, recognizing and managing our aggressive impulses, and finding a sense of purpose that gives our lives meaning and direction.
And of course, confronting our own mortality, not in a morbid way, but in a way that helps us appreciate the preciousness of life and make the most of the time we have.
Yeah, death is the ultimate reality check. It reminds us that our time is limited and we should focus on what truly matters.
So for all of you listening, here's a final thought-provoking question now that you've learned about the shadow. What aspects of your own personality might you be repressing? And how can you channel that energy in more positive directions?
That's a great question to reflect on. And if you're interested in exploring these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out Greene's book.
Yes.
You can find a link to it in the description or pinned comment.
Exactly.
It's a journey of self-discovery that can really change the way you see yourself and the world around you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the depths of human nature.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
So, it's really interesting how Greene presents these laws not as isolated things, but as this interconnected web of, principles.
Yeah, it's like a complex system.
Exactly.
Where everything is kind of influencing everything else.
Right. And for example, we talked about the power of irrationality and how that can lead to things like groupthink and the entitlement mentality.
Right.
But we also discussed how understanding the shadow can help us recognize and manage our own aggressive impulses.
Yeah.
Which then can make us less susceptible to being manipulated by others.
Right. It's all connected.
Exactly.
It's like he's giving us this mental toolkit for navigating the complexities of human interactions.
Totally. Like a framework for understanding not just ourselves, but also the people that we encounter in our everyday lives.
And that understanding, I think, can be incredibly empowering.
Oh, for sure.
It can help us make more conscious choices.
Yeah.
In our relationships, in our careers.
In our lives.
In our lives as a whole.
Absolutely.
So where do we go from here? What can our listeners do to actually apply these insights, to their own lives?
Well, I think the first step, like we've been saying, is to cultivate that self-awareness.
Yeah.
Like, we need to be honest with ourselves about our strengths and our weaknesses, our tendencies, our triggers,
We're taking inventory of our own human nature.
Exactly. And once we have a better understanding of ourselves, we can start to develop strategies for managing those irrational impulses, setting healthy boundaries with other people, and pursuing a life that's really aligned with our values.
And let's not forget about the importance of finding our purpose.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like when we have a sense of purpose, a reason for getting out of bed in the morning, it gives us direction. Motivation and that resilience in the face of challenges.
It's like having a compass that guides us through life's ups and downs.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really struck by just the depth and the breadth of Greene's insights.
It really is impressive how he manages to synthesize all this information from such a wide range of disciplines.
I know, it's incredible.
History, philosophy,
psychology,
sociology.
And he does it in a way that is both thought-provoking and engaging.
I think it's his knack for storytelling, weaving together these compelling narratives and historical examples and practical advice.
Exactly. And speaking of practical advice, Greene offers a lot of concrete tips for how to apply these laws of human nature to our daily lives.
He does. He provides strategies for dealing with difficult people, for influencing others ethically, for navigating the challenges of love, work, and power.
So if you're looking for a book that can help you understand yourself and the world around you better, I highly recommend checking out The Laws of Human Nature.
I second that. And, if you're short on time, you can always revisit this deep dive to refresh your memory on some of the key takeaways. And for those who want to go even deeper, you can find a link to the full book in the description or pinned comment.
Yes, exactly.
So much good stuff to unpack.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the depths of human nature.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.